So I have a feeling this video is gonna run a bit longer than I want it to, but I wanted to talk about today's video because I find it really interesting. I think you would find it interesting, and I think it's also good for setting and managing expectations for yourself, either as a reader and or writer slash aspiring author. So in today's video, we're gonna be talking about all of the different major bestseller lists, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Indie Next, talking about how they work, what to know about them, but most importantly, the discrepancies across those bestseller lists. Hi there, my name is Lauren. I'm a traditionally published best-selling author as well as book and publishing strategist, and I make it my mission to educate aspiring authors about the book business, what they gotta know, what they don't know, what they should know, etc. If there's anything you gotta know about the book biz, it's that there is a huge database called Circana Book Scan, and this is sort of like the holy grail of book sales. They are this very, very well-known database that is highly used and referred to within the industry, especially the publishing industry. They're formerly known as Nielsen Book Scan, but they did like a rebrand at the end of 2022. I don't know why they changed their name, but they did. So it used to be called Nielsen Book Scan, now it's Circana, and a lot of people use it in the industry. They use it for publishing, they use it for marketing, they use it for just tracking industry trends. And according to their website, they cover approximately 85% of trade print books sold in the US through direct reporting from all major retailers, independent bookstores, and many others. So your local bookstore down the road most likely reports any and all sales that they make to Circana Book Scan. It's not 100% accurate, but it is the best snapshot that we have into what books are doing well, what book sales are like, what trends are happening. It's like tracking the market, basically. And the reason why it's important that you know this is because, like, do you remember when you were in school and you had like science class and stuff and you had to like do experiments? There's always a control group to compare all of the other experiments to. That's like what Circana is. This is sort of like the sun, and all of these bestseller lists are sort of like the planets that roughly orbit around it. And the reason I mention that is because often with a lot of these bestseller lists, there is some kind of curation process. New York Times is a really, really great example of that. I talked about it in a previous video that I made about how, like, in depth how all of that works. But often it's rarely do these bestseller lists match exactly what Circana say are actually the best-selling books based on the data that we've been sent from all of these bookstores and retailers and stuff. Many try to game the system in order to get put on these bestseller lists, and oftentimes these bestseller lists are not fair to independently published authors or self-published authors. The only one that was kindest to indie authors was USA Today. They canceled or temporarily paused their bestseller list for like a year. They revamped it, and now it's like less inclusive of indie authors, and I'm not really sure why. I'm also going to be talking about that a little bit later. But if you are interested in what book sales for indie books are, there is a database separate from Circana known as BookStat, and they're more inclusive of indie sales, including ebook, online print sales, and digital audiobook sales. So that's a little bit of context around these bestseller lists, and now that you have that sort of point of reference, it's going to be a lot easier for me to kind of chat with you about these bestseller lists, what they mean, and why I think this is kind of a big deal. So let's start with probably what has to be the most prominent bestseller list. It's the one that everyone and their mother wants to get in on, and it is the New York Times. Now, the thing to know about the New York Times is they give a lot of preference to books that have been traditionally published, ideally through one of the big five publishers, all located in New York City. This is Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Hachette, Macmillan, and HarperCollins. I'm going to pop a graphic up on the screen. I'm pretty big into graphics. It is extremely selective. And oftentimes, like I mentioned before, this list is going to differ heavily from what Circana Book Scan says based on the data that they receive from all these different retailers. And the reason that the New York Times in particular looks much different is because editors curate this list to give to administration for easier choosing. There's a lot of credibility, notoriety, prestige that comes from getting on the New York Times or any of these bestseller lists, but you have to sell thousands or tens of thousands of copies for multiple weeks consecutively at a time to even be considered for it. So that's all you got to know about the New York Times, but feel free to take a look at those graphics. Links in the description as well if you want access to it. So what's important to know about these bestseller lists that I'm going to be looking at, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Indie Next, and USA Today, is that I tried to sync them up as closely as possible. So the sales are based on the time frame of end of October of 2022. If that makes any sense. That was kind of clunky. I'm going to be looking at hardcover nonfiction specifically, just so you know that. So for the Times, we have Prequel, Enough, Worthy, Behind the Scenes, Elon Musk, Killing the Witches, Democracy Awakening, The Democrat Party Hates America, To Rescue the Constitution, and Going Infinite by Michael Lewis. That's the New York Times. For the Wall Street Journal, within the same time period, same thing, hardcover nonfiction, we have The Woman in Me, The Pioneer Woman Cooks, Hidden Potential, How to Know a Person, Romney, If You Would Have Told Me, Prequel, How to Win at Chess, The Great Disappearance, and Atomic Habits by Jane Clear. And you know what's interesting is that when I saw the New York Times bestseller list, I was so surprised that The Woman in Me didn't pop up. And I looked at when it was released, and it was released on October 24th. So I don't know if the sales for the Times was based on like sales before the book came out or after October 24th. I don't really know, but I just found that interesting. So New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Indie Next is The Woman in Me, Democracy Awakening, How to Know a Person, Prequel, Enough, The Wager, Hidden Potential, Going Infinite, The Creative Act, and The Comfort of Crows. As I'm kind of rattling these off, you can kind of, you'll hear some of the titles repeated across these lists, and others are like one-off ones that you haven't heard about before. Now, if we're looking at USA Today, okay, there's a little note that I got to add to this one. This does not have a dedicated nonfiction hardcover list. It just has the top 150 books during the time period that I'm looking at, which is end of October of 2022. So I had to use a filter option to show only nonfiction within that list. And so we have The Woman in Me, of course, No Brainer by Jeff Kinney, The Exchange, both of those are fiction, so they don't count. Killers of the Flower Moon, Curse for True Love, and The Secret, those are fiction as well, so I blurred those out. Across the board, you can see that these are all of the top 10 best-selling titles for each of these lists, okay? And what I did was these like recurring titles, I color-coded them across the list so that you can see how frequently they're appearing on multiple bestseller lists. And what's interesting is that there was only one book that was listed across all 4 of these bestseller lists, and it was Prequel by Rachel Maddow. It was number 1 on the New York Times, number 7 on the Wall Street Journal, number 4 on Indie Next, and number 9 on USA Today. So what this tells me is that this is a book that is genuinely performing really well, probably based on word of mouth, probably in combination with her platform, with her connections. I don't know who Rachel Maddow is, but clearly this tells me that she is a very, very popular woman. Her book is very popular. So by seeing her name across all 4 lists, I'm thinking, okay, this one's pretty legit because it's recurring, right? The Woman in Me by Britney Spears appeared on 3 out of the 4 lists. It was number 1 on the Wall Street Journal, number 1 on Indie Next, and number 1 on USA Today. No surprise. This was an extremely popular book. As for the others, I only see them on no more than 2 out of these 4 lists. Adam Grant is one of them. Cassidy Hutchison is one of them. Michael Lewis is another one. So that tells me that those books are doing moderately well, at least in the context of these 4 lists that I have. Sometimes, if there is one person who's randomly on a Wall Street Journal list that maybe you haven't heard of, it could be because they're doing really well, or it could be that they probably paid to get on that list, or paid for a guarantee to get put on that list, and or paid for a massive ebook blast or some kind of campaign to generate a bunch of sales so that they could skyrocket onto that list. And I know this because I've worked with some authors who have paid for a guarantee to get put on some of these lists. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that that is an option for people who have the budget. Donald Trump, for example, I know that he paid for one of his books to get put on the New York Times bestseller list. And if you were to do that, that would cost approximately $250,000 if you wanted to pay to be guaranteed a slot on the New York Times bestseller list, that would cost you probably $250,000. If you wanted to get put on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list or get a guarantee, I've heard a range from $45,000 to $65,000. I really don't know if the Indie Next List or USA Today do something like that, but I have heard that if someone has a budget and they're placing a whole lot of value on their book for one thing or another. I don't know if it's prestige. I don't know if it's bigger and better opportunities. It could be for sales. Sometimes they'll pay that money if they have the resources and the capital to get a guaranteed slot on one of these lists. So sometimes when I see these like one-off people, I think, oh, maybe they paid to get put on the list. I'm not saying that's true for any of these. Maybe it's true for some of them. I really don't know, but I am letting you know that is something that is possible. You can buy your way onto a list. By the way, I do have to mention the Wall Street Journal ended its bestseller list in early November of 2023 because the company's contract with Circana, that book data collecting thing, it expired and they chose not to renew it. Why? I don't know. I'm not going to fake an answer, but they are no longer doing bestseller lists for books. Based on all of that, what does this mean? It means don't believe everything that you see. Because one book is doing extremely well on one list might not mean that it's doing extremely well overall. Because it's a bestseller, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It could just mean that it's popular. It could just mean that maybe someone paid to get put on that list. Sometimes books make it on these lists because of connections with industry professionals. It could be because they have the capital to invest in a guarantee. It could be that maybe previously they were on one of these bestseller lists. Because if people in this industry see that you are an author who's done really, really well before, they're going to keep rewarding you for that. So if I am Stephen King, it would be no problem. It would be easier for me to get put on one of these bestseller lists versus me, Lauren Erickson, a debut author, and I have no shot of making it on the New York Times, and I'm okay with that. You know, a lot of it has to do with just industry norms. Talking about the money side of books and sometimes even the business side of books in this particular way can often make people uncomfortable. Maybe some people don't like having these things talked about because it maybe ruins some kind of glowy image that they have or that they want, you know, these bestseller lists to have or something. I don't know. But I do think it's worth talking about because I believe in transparency within the book space as much as I'm allowed to see, you know, with the information that is publicly available. If you're someone who is writing a book, you're publishing a book, you would very much like to write or publish a book, and you're more in the ideation stage, what does this mean for you? I personally, knowing what I know as a published author and having worked as a book marketer and based on this information, would concern myself more with generating organic word of mouth. And that means playing the long game. If you want a book to have a lot of visibility in a very short amount of time, that's usually going to cost you more money because you have to pay to do some kind of blast. Organic is always a really, really great way to go just because it can mean something to other people. It isn't just like a shot in the dark. It isn't just paying for visibility. It's earning people's attention and building an honest and true connection with them through your particular book. I just feel like that is such a more meaningful way to let people know who you are as an artist and the kind of content that you like to write about. You can never go wrong with marketing yourself within your community or any various social circles that you're in. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. The only difference is it takes more time. It's like paying for liposuction versus spending 6 months going to the gym. You know, it's like, I'm not going to make that decision for you, but I am going to educate you on what each of those options mean and kind of maybe what it looks like if you were to pursue either one of them. I don't think it's okay for people to say, oh, I just wrote a really good book and got on the New York Times bestseller list. Like, there's always more to it than just that, and I don't think that is ethical. So this is a video where I'm kind of expressing my opinion a little more than I maybe do in some of my other ones, mostly because I know someone somewhere is going to see this and not like what I have to say, but I do think it's important to talk about. So thank you for being open-minded and sitting with me through this video. My thoughts were a little bit of everywhere, mostly because there's so many details that I could talk about with each of these things, but just collectively, like comprehensively, I wanted to give you a snapshot of really side by side what these bestseller lists look like and just why there are those discrepancies. So I would say to just, if you're a first-time author, keep it simple for yourself, especially if this is your first book. That's what I did, and you can always build. You can always build. It's way easier to have a slow and steady build with whatever it is, visibility, credibility, future opportunities, book sales. It's always easier to build rather than have a burst and then be disappointed when it doesn't last. So with that all being said, if you found this interesting, feel free to like and subscribe. Drop your comments below, thoughts that you have. If there's anything else that you want me to take a look at, let me know and I'll put some stuff together just for you. So that's all I got, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.